Hey, I'm Felissa Rose, and you're watching Keto and Crime.
Hey everyone, welcome to Keto and Crime. Today I have another Keto and Crime classic for you. Today we're going to be looking at the case of this man, Ephren Taylor Jr., who was the child of a Southern Church of Christ minister who was once a engineer, nuclear technician. This young man was quite intelligent. He appeared on Donnie Deutsch's The Next Big Thing on CNBC as a very young man. He also created video games for himself and his friends as a child, had very successful real businesses that could have literally been that next big thing. But instead, he decided to turn to his family business of being a minister and basically put in place what can only be described as a church related Ponzi scheme. Much like the Southern Baptist Association of Arizona, we have another church Ponzi scheme. He and his wife lived off the money of hardworking individuals who believed they were putting their money into God's hands to grow for their retirement and ended up losing everything. They basically squandered it on his wife's music videos, which you will see in the video. He was endorsed by a lot of the biggest African American televangelists who also ended up having some troubles of their own, which I will cover. I do plan to cover some scandals in the African American church going forward. And so let's just say this is the first one of those. I'm adding this to my Scuzzy televangelist list to talk about, because it's not just the white Pentecostal church that has this issue. It's all churches. I think, from us looking at the fundamentalist LDS and others, we can see that all churches, just religious people in general, are all susceptible to this plague. It's just people. It's not a race thing. It's a people thing. That there are just bad people in the world, and Ephren Taylor was one of those. So, with that being said, we're going to take a look at one of the very first videos I ever made on white collar crime. For this video, Ephren Taylor Jr. defrauded millions. So we're going to talk about the 2015 case of Ephren Taylor, told to you by 2018 Tracy. Here we go. Let's dive in. Keto Comic here with White Collar Crime Wednesday. For a very special subscriber, I'm doing the story of Ephren Taylor Jr. I call it Ministry of Deception because that's cheesy and that's just who I am. But he's been featured on shows like American Greed, True Crime Daily. This is truly a story of a young man with a bright future that went way wrong, and he used the African American church, or church in general, to basically scam people out of millions of dollars, and he ended up in federal prison as a result, out of millions of dollars. And I believe coming in second only to people that hurt children and elderly people, physically, mentally, what have you, is people that use religion to take advantage of others. Because religion, even though I'm not religious myself, religion is a very important part of a lot of people's lives, and when someone uses it to get rich and scam people, really irritates me. So this is a pretty interesting case. So let's get into it, shall we? Ephren Taylor Jr. was born July 27, 1982, to a Mr. and Mrs. Ephren Taylor Sr. in Fort Gibson, Mississippi. Now, I could not find the name of Ephren's mom. That's pretty well guarded. I'm sure it's somewhere in some court records, but as deep as I dug, I could not find it. But one thing I think in every public record, they're simply referred to as Mr. and Mrs. Ephren Taylor Sr. or the Reverend and Mrs. Ephren Taylor Sr., which is not unusual given the denomination they were a part of. But he was born in Fort Gibson, Mississippi. At that time, he was the father, Ephren Sr., was an engineer at a nuclear power plant. His wife was a homemaker. They eventually moved to Decatur, Alabama, and then later on to Overland Park and Kansas City, Kansas, where he took over a Church of Christ as senior pastor. Now, being that he was part of the Church of Christ, there's no wonder that everyone refers to them as Mr. and Mrs. or Reverend and Mrs. because I don't know if you know much about the Church of Christ. I grew up in a very fundamentalist Pentecostal tradition. Church of Christ is probably even more fundamentalist than the Pentecostal tradition. A lot of they don't use instrumental music. They have very distinct roles for genders. The man is definitely head of the household. They're very much biblical literalists, so it's a very strict environment. So that's why it doesn't surprise me that I could not find her name anywhere because she would not, in that tradition, be identified outside her marriage. So, and I don't mean to insult any of my listeners that may be Church of Christ. I doubt there's very few of you out there that are listening to drama channels if you are Church of Christ. But so that doesn't surprise me. So he grew up uh, in a multi-child household with very strict parents. They did educate them in public school. Uh, there wasn't a whole lot of money because he gave up being an engineer. The father gave up being an engineer and became a full-time minister, so his salary was definitely dependent on donations and tithes coming in from members of the church. But so they were very frugal, and it was this frugality that led to Ephraim's first foray into the world of being an entrepreneur. And like I said earlier, this is a very sad story for a lot of people because you had a very bright young mind that just got turned the wrong way. And this photo here is Ephraim and his wife Michelle, who becomes a integral player in the story a little bit later on. But let's keep going. Okay. When Ephraim was 11 years old, well, actually, when he was 9, he really got into video games, played them constantly, became very good at them, and then went to his parents and asked for a new game, as children can tend to do. They told him they would not spend $40 or $50 on a new game, and maybe he should just create his own. And you know what? Unlike a lot of kids, he did. He created his own video game. He played it, he enjoyed it, he perfected it, and then he started making them in bulk, making 4 or 5 at a time and selling them to kids at school. So he created his first business by the time he was 12. And he was actually making enough money to not only help the family, but also pay for everything that a kid could want as far as being a kid. So he had it made. He kind of got out of the video game world and kind of went into this is about the time the internet was becoming a thing. I know a lot of us can't remember a time when it wasn't a thing, but I grew up in the 80s and I can tell you it wasn't always a thing. The last part of the 90s, early 2000s, when he was 16, he developed a job hunting site for teens where he charged companies to place ads and charged teens a membership fee to find summer jobs, permanent jobs, college jobs, whatever they might. And he actually came up with this idea while he was attending classes at the prestigious Kauffman Center for Entrepreneurial Leadership in Kansas City, Kansas. He came up with this idea while there and actually marketed it, and actually it started making a lot of money because companies bought into it and used it to recruit bright young minds. And Ephren Taylor, by the time he was 19, was a millionaire. A lot of people say multimillionaire, but I couldn't really find a whole lot of information on exactly how much money Go Ferret was worth, but it was a lot. And he won a prestigious Microsoft award in the year 2000 at the Microsoft Teen Challenge with Go Ferret. And after that, of course, you had tech companies wanting to buy it from him, and eventually he did sell it. So by the age of 19, he was completely retired from the tech industry. Yeah. He had actually married his wife, Michelle, who was born in Overland Park, Paris, June 25th, 1984, just prior to retiring. And he did just want to retire. He just wanted to retire, do some speaking engagements and things like that. But Michelle had other ideas for him. She was an aspiring pop singer and wanted him to basically fund her career, help her get studio time, buy airtime, you know, do videos, whatever. And he really liked that idea of being able to, again, use his brain, use the talents and gifts he had to help her. So they went full force into that. He did retire, as I said, from the tech industry, but he kind of stayed alive by doing interviews. He did speaking engagements all over. By this time, they were still in Kansas, but had bought a second home in Atlanta, Georgia, which will become very, very important to the story. So he started speaking not only at civic organizations, tech conferences. He was uh, a regular member of the panel on Donnie Deutsch's Next Big Idea on CNBC, which is a huge show that showcases entrepreneurs and people that had big ideas. He was a regular guest there, so he was doing the speaking circuit and still making a lot of money doing that. But that was in no way enough to fund both the lifestyle, very upper middle class, comfortable lifestyle they had become accustomed to, and fund Michelle's music career. So they came up with a less than kosher idea, and let's get into that. While living part-time in Atlanta, they had become acquainted with Bishop Eddie Long of the New Birth Church in Atlanta. If you Google Bishop Eddie Long, you'll see a ton of like bad stuff. He's not a saint by any stretch of the imagination. There's been a lot of scandal at his church, both sexual and physical, as far as money. He was accused. As a gay person, I don't really care for Bishop Long because he does spout a lot of anti-homosexual rhetoric and breed a lot of hate in the church, in my opinion. And in 2012, way after this Ephren Taylor story broke, he was accused of basically being in a inappropriate relationship with male members of his church. And this is Bishop Long here. And this is him, I guess, after some weight loss and gym, as you can see. But he was accused of being very inappropriate with some young male members of his church. I'm not saying it wasn't like a predator situation, but these were young men, at least 18, that he kind of sent inappropriate pictures to. So his church has been, rife with scandal. So it was actually the perfect breeding ground for what Ephren Taylor would do. So Ephren Taylor and his wife joined New Birth Church around 2007. And because of his success, people were always asking him, how did you do what you did? And instead of telling them about his tech experience and how he sold a company and how he did speaking engagements, he began to lead people to thinking that he had this wonderful investment opportunity that no one else knew about, and how it was Christian based, and how you could get guaranteed 20% returns on your money if you just invested in it. And he started talking about that around the church. And of course, Bishop Long got wind of it and decided to actually give him a platform to talk about this investment opportunity at the church.
Man, keep standing on your feet. They told me before I get up here that don't come up here all week. You got to be crunk when you come to New Birth. And I said, all right, I want to see what I can do. I still got a little bit of youth on me. Let's keep it crunk. Now, I think y'all got this song here. I was hanging out on YouTube before I came. I was like, well, I need to see what type of congregation that New Birth is. And you know when you type in Eddie Long or New Birth on YouTube, you know what the first video is that comes up, right? Cross it up. Play that song. Oh, I think it's time to cross it up right now, because I believe that many of us are thinking that we are in some type of dark time, as they would say, that there is a recession that is going on. But I believe for the people of God, especially on this morning, especially for those of you that woke up this morning, put on your clothes to get all looking good and smelling good, got in your nice...
As you can see, he was a great speaker because he had honed his skills from basically doing the speaker circuit for 4 or 5 years, because there was quite a span of time between the time he retired from the tech industry, started doing speaking engagements, and when they joined New Birth. So as you can see in the great African American church tradition, it was a lot of music, a lot of inspirational, more of a motivational speaker. That's kind of the case with most mega churches like New Birth Church. If you ever watched New Birth's broadcasts, or you've ever watched Joel Osteen, or any of the mega church models, even like the Crystal Cathedral, which was a big one when I was a kid, they're more motivational speakers than pastors, and they really get their crowd pumped up, and that's how they're able to get the amount of money out of their congregants that they do, and he was no different. So Eddie Long started letting him speak at the church. As you can see, he could have been a pastor. I mean, he'd been around it his whole life with his father being a pastor and watching Bishop Long do it. He could have very well used his talent for good, but he started talking about this investment opportunity that was no more than a classic Ponzi scheme. And if you don't know what a Ponzi scheme is, it was kind of coined based on Charles Ponzi back in the 1920s. Basically, it's a scheme where there's nothing but money coming in. There is no investment. There is no interest being earned. There is nothing but money and the word of the person taking the money. So basically, you promise people exorbitant returns, and when I say 20%, that is exorbitant. You should never expect a 20% return on any investment. The norm on savings accounts is like 1 to 2% return per year. The norm on most traditional Wall Street investments is 3 to 5%. That's the norm. So if you have an investment that's beating that legitimately, consider it a great investment. But no one except maybe 2 people in the whole history of investment have ever beat the numbers by that much. But yet he was promising people a 20% return on all the money they invested in this. So that's what Charles Ponzi did way back in the 20s. He promised people exorbitant returns. He would take in their money and then use the money taken in from new investors to pay the returns on the old investors. So you can see how this is a house of cards, how a Ponzi scheme, if you don't have more money coming in than's going out, it's going to collapse on itself. And that's what normally happens. And that's what happened here. But he was promising people that he was taking their money and he was investing it into poor neighborhoods, businesses in poor, predominantly African American neighborhoods, because this was an African American church, and he would change that story when he went to other mega churches, because he also spoke at Joel Osteen's church. He spoke at some other mega churches that had a more a different race makeup, basically, and he would tell, this church it was all for African American neighborhoods. He would tell this church it was just for poor neighborhoods in general, and he would tell this church it was for Latina neighborhoods. So, Latino neighborhoods. So just keep that in mind. And what he would do, he said he was taking this money and helping the small business people. He was investing in things like convenience stores, gas stations, affordable housing, mom and pop corner stores. You get it. Building a real helping these neighborhoods build themselves up. And he was investing this money into those things, and your returns would come from those businesses thriving. Well, there were no businesses that were being invested in. Instead, he was using the church people's money, and it's estimated he was able to bilk people in an estimation of $12 to $15 million across several churches. New Birth being his prime target, because that's where he had the biggest platform. But where was this money going, you say? Instead of just funding a lavish lifestyle, let me show you where this money is going. Remember Michelle? Michelle was an aspiring pop singer. A lot of it was going to funding her career. So let's take a look at where these parishioners' money was going. There's Ephren.
Magic when I work these hits. I'ma make the boys say damn. Bet you wanna know who I am. So killer am I walking. is mean. All other girls wanna be like me. I'm sexy, I'm perfection.
That's where their money was going. And not only was it not very good music and didn't go anywhere, it was literally, that was a song called Billionaire. It was literally taking it and rubbing it in their faces. You know, we're millionaires, look how we live on your money. So that's the reason I have no respect for Michelle Taylor at all, and very little for Ephren. He's a grown man, he can make his own decisions, but I think he was a lot under her thumb. But that's where the money was going. And that's another thing that gets me. He propagated the scam on being a Christian and being a religious man, but yet his wife is making music like that, which is obviously worldly in the view of the church. So I don't get why people fell for this. But again, you see the kind of energy that gets going at those sermons. You know, it's easy for anyone to get caught up in it, I suppose. I don't know if there's anybody that is a member or has been a member of a mega church that wants to comment on that. Please do below, because I find it an interesting phenomenon. But anyway, he lived the high life from like 2007 till about 2010 on other people's money. He was constantly going from church to church, bringing in more money to pay the investors back. I mean, he was paying some of his investors back, and they were getting their 20% because he had to keep the scheme going. But eventually, people stopped giving as much, and he came into dire straits. And then there were some other improprieties that happened with New Birth that he got caught up in, and so there was an investigation that was prompted into all of New Birth's financial dealings in 2010, because there was some financial improprieties there as far as what they were paying, what was tax exempt versus what wasn't, what Bishop Long was doing with his salary. So it all just kind of morphed into a perfect storm. So Ephren and Michelle got investigated along with New Birth. And as par for what they found, because they found no record of any investments in any small businesses in any city USA, the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, filed official charges against Ephren and Michelle Taylor, or just Ephren really, because he was the only one that signed anything, of course, official charges against them in 2010. So the whole thing just started to unravel. And then people realized, hey, I'm not getting my returns. People started to complain. More charges, more improprieties came out. And finally, Bishop Long himself realized he had been scammed. His parishioners had been scammed. And he actually, in 2011, made a YouTube video begging Ephren to return the money to his parishioners, even if without the returns, just return their money. So let's take a look at that.
And I just want to come to you for a few moments to let you know about a situation that we have, and one that touches my heart deeply, and one that I am working along with my parishioners and my leaders to resolve. A couple of years ago, about a year ago, we had a financial seminar here at the church, and we do many financial seminars and other people that we bring into the congregation to help empower the congregation, help empower the community. We've been known for bringing major speakers from around the world for empowerment to strengthen so there'll be a better quality of life. And we have more productive citizens, people who can help others. So with all that, we had City Capital come in, Mr. Ephren Taylor, who came in and ran a wonderful seminar for us. But at the same time, we found out later that some of our members had made some investments in IRAs, retirement accounts, through his business, and through that, collectively, about $1 million has been not returned. The investment has gone sour, and I'm making an appeal because once they shared with me the hardship, once they shared with me what's going on with their families, and I am a pastor. I have compassion for people. My whole life is dedicated to helping people establish a legacy for them to pass on to their children's children. I have made appeals to Mr. Taylor. I've made appeals to City Capital. And I'm asking you to join with me to make an appeal to Ephren Taylor and City Capital that they would return as soon as possible.
And there you go. So by 2011, Ephren was completely cut loose from his mentor, Eddie Long. So, of course, some of the money was recovered, but of course, there's still a lot of it outstanding. Michelle and Ephren kind of went into hiding After that, they, of course, all their property was seized and sold to repay their debts, but then they took off and left Atlanta and went back to Kansas City, Kansas, and there they actually opened up a spa and massage parlor for a little while, and that's where what they did to make ends meet, um, in the Kansas and Missouri area there, until 2015 when his trial finally concluded and he was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for wire fraud, for embezzlement, and for just operating a Ponzi scheme in general. And he was sentenced to paying back $15.6 million in retributions upon his release. So that's where it stands. He's in prison. Michelle still lives in the Kansas area. I think they did close down their spa business. I'm not sure exactly what she does. I didn't want people to go out and try to find her, so I'm not going to put any other, but she's still in the Kansas, Missouri area, probably just doing what she can to scrape by, and he's sitting in federal prison. So that's where it stands. There's still thousands of people that have not received their money back, and honestly probably never will, because what's going to happen? He's going to file bankruptcy, and it'll never be recovered because he doesn't have it. It's like literally getting blood out of the perpetual turnip. You can't do it. So that's pretty much where this story ends. I know it's not as in depth or as long as my normal ones, but there really wasn't a whole lot to it. I mean, he was very young when this happened. He was in his late 20s, early 30s when he started this scam and was in jail by his late 30s. So there really wasn't a whole lot of history, and actually about half of his life was legitimate businesses that made him money, and so he just got pulled down the wrong track. I don't want to blame it all on his wife, but I think she had a lot to do with it. Just from her attitude I've seen in interviews and stuff, she doesn't seem like a person that's satisfied with just having a normal standard of living. Um, so I think he got pulled down a bad path, but this is a pretty simple Ponzi scheme. I mean, they're simple. As bad as they are, they're simple. You just take in money, as much money as you can, use it to pay off investors that are due their payments, and then you bring in more money to pay off the next ones. And it's kind of simple in its format, even though it's general. So, and he used the African American church to do it. And he's not the only one that's ever done that. We're going to get into some more that have used the church to kind of defraud people. I think mega churches in general have a sketchy rapport with their parishioners, but the fact this was tied to a mega church just made it even more interesting. But anyway, that's the scoop on Ephren Taylor Jr. His father is still a pastor of the Church of Christ pastor, still I believe in Shawnee, Kansas, and has not really made any public comment other than he supports his son, and that's what I would expect from a father. So that's where it stands. I hope you enjoyed this White Collar Crime Wednesday. Ephren Taylor, my very special subscriber, you know who you are. This was for you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I did it justice, and I'll be back next Wednesday with another White Collar Crime video. I'll be back this week with more reactions, more keto videos. Like, comment, subscribe. Check out my comedy album below. Check out some merch if you want to help me keep be able to afford better equipment and stuff. That's always great, but I'm not going anywhere. I'll continue to pump out these videos because I enjoy doing them. Thank you so much. Ketosis, y'all. Keto Comic out.